The French Quarter was alive with jazz and the sweet smell of beignets when Sarah Mitchell first met James Cooper. She had no idea that this chance meeting would lead to a wedding, a murder, and the unraveling of a secret that would shock the entire city. It was a typical humid evening at Café du Monde. Sarah, 28, sat alone with her café au lait and powdered sugar-covered beignets, watching tourists stream past. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore the crisp uniform of the nearby hospital where she worked as a nurse. James Cooper walked in, looking like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. Tall, well-dressed, with salt and pepper hair that made him look distinguished despite being only 35. When all the tables filled up, he asked to share hers. "I couldn't help but notice you're reading The Great Gatsby," he said, pointing to the book beside her coffee. "It's my favorite." Sarah would later tell her best friend Lisa that it felt like fate. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in everything she had to say. By the end of the evening, they'd exchanged numbers. What followed was a fairy tale courtship. James, who said he worked as an investment banker, showered Sarah with attention and gifts. He took her to the finest restaurants in the French Quarter, surprised her with weekend trips to nearby Gulf Coast beaches, and seemed to anticipate her every wish. "He's perfect," Sarah told Lisa over lunch at their favorite po' boy shop. "Sometimes I think it's too good to be true." Lisa, who had known Sarah since nursing school, was more cautious. "Don't you think it's moving a little fast?" "We don't know much about him." But Sarah was in love. When James proposed after just 6 months of dating, presenting her with a stunning 3-carat diamond ring at Antoine's restaurant, she said yes without hesitation. The wedding was set for March 2020, giving them 6 months to plan. James insisted on handling most of the arrangements himself, saying he wanted to spare Sarah the stress while she focused on her demanding job at the hospital. He chose the historic St. Louis Cathedral for the ceremony and booked the elegant Roosevelt Hotel for the reception. The guest list was small. Sarah's family and friends from Louisiana, and what James said was his small circle of colleagues and friends from New York. "My parents passed away years ago," he explained when Sarah asked about his family. "And I'm an only child." He spoke about growing up in Manhattan, attending Princeton, and building his career in finance. Sarah's mother, Ellen Mitchell, a retired teacher from Baton Rouge, had her doubts. "Don't you think it's strange that he doesn't have any old friends or family coming?" she asked Sarah during a dress fitting. "He moved around a lot for work," Sarah defended him, "and he's just private about his past." Looking back, there were signs that something wasn't quite right. James was always vague about his work, saying only that he handled private wealth management. He never used social media, claiming he preferred privacy. His cell phone often went straight to voicemail during certain hours, which he explained as meetings in different time zones. But he was so attentive, so loving, that Sarah dismissed these small concerns. When he surprised her with a honeymoon plan, 2 weeks at a private villa in the Caribbean, she was ecstatic. March 15th, 2020, dawned clear and cool in New Orleans. The St. Louis Cathedral looked like something from a fairy tale, its white towers rising against the blue sky. Sarah's dress was classic and elegant, a fitted lace gown that made her look like a princess. James stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the successful businessman. The ceremony was beautiful, though several guests later remembered that no one stood on the groom's side of the church. The reception at the Roosevelt was everything Sarah had dreamed of. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, the champagne flowed, and the band played jazz standards as couples danced. "You've made me the happiest man alive," James whispered to Sarah during their first dance. The next morning, they boarded a private plane to St. Lucia. Sarah Mitchell Cooper had no idea she was flying into a nightmare. The villa in St. Lucia was even more beautiful than the photos James had shown Sarah. Perched on a cliff overlooking the Caribbean Sea, it offered complete privacy with its own pool, beach access, and a staff that seemed to anticipate their every need. "This must cost a fortune," Sarah said as they toured the property. James wrapped his arms around her. "Nothing but the best for my wife." The first few days were perfect. They swam in the crystal-clear water, ate romantic dinners under the stars, and spent long hours in their private pool. James was attentive and loving, everything a new husband should be. But on their fourth night in paradise, everything changed. Sarah woke up around midnight to find James's side of the bed empty. She heard his voice coming from the villa's office, speaking in low, urgent tones. Curious, she crept closer to the door. "The transfer needs to happen now," she heard him say. "No, you don't understand. They're getting close. Yes, all of it. Every penny. I don't care about the fees." Sarah's heart began to race. This didn't sound like an investment banker talking to clients. When she heard him mention offshore accounts and clean money, her blood ran cold. The next morning, while James was swimming, Sarah did something she'd never done before. She went through his things. In his laptop bag, she found 3 passports with different names, all with his photo. A USB drive contained documents showing wire transfers of millions of dollars to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Her husband wasn't James Cooper, an investment banker from New York. He was someone else entirely. With shaking hands, Sarah used her phone to search the names from the passports. What she found made her sick to her stomach. David Reynolds, wanted for investment fraud in Chicago. Michael Bennett, suspected of running a Ponzi scheme in Miami. James Cooper, the latest identity of a man who had allegedly stolen over $50 million from retirees' pension funds. Photos showed her husband in different cities with different names, always with the same modus operandi: charm his way into financial firms, gain trust, then disappear with millions. And now he had married her. Was she just another part of his cover story? A naive nurse who could make him look legitimate while he moved his stolen money? Sarah's first instinct was to run. But where? They were on an isolated property on a foreign island. James, or whatever his real name was, controlled all their travel arrangements. And if he caught her trying to leave? She thought about the elderly victims she'd read about online. People who had lost their life savings to this man. Their stories of financial ruin and shattered dreams filled her with rage. That's when she noticed the bottle of sleeping pills in her toiletry bag. As a nurse, she knew exactly how many it would take. That evening, Sarah played the perfect newlywed. She wore the red dress James loved, suggested they open a special bottle of champagne, and smiled as he talked about their future plans. "Let's have dinner on the terrace," she suggested, "under the stars." While James was showering, Sarah crushed 8 sleeping pills and mixed them into his champagne glass. Her hands were steady. Years of dispensing medications had taught her precision. They dined on fresh lobster and talked about plans to start a family. James never noticed anything wrong with his champagne. Within an hour, he was having trouble keeping his eyes open. "I think I need to lie down," he mumbled. Sarah helped him to bed, watched as his breathing grew slower, deeper. When she was sure he was unconscious, she went to work. The villa had a small boat for guests' use. Sarah had watched the staff handle it during their first days there. She knew she could operate it. The nearest town was only a few miles down the coast. She packed quickly, just essential documents and a change of clothes. Then she returned to the bedroom with the rest of the sleeping pills. Sarah stood over the bed, watching her husband's chest rise and fall. She thought about all the lives he had ruined, all the people whose trust he had betrayed. With clinical precision, she crushed the remaining pills and mixed them with water. Tilting his head back, she slowly poured the mixture down his throat, making sure he swallowed. Then she sat beside him and waited. As a nurse, she knew what to expect. His breathing would slow until it stopped. It would look like an accidental overdose, a tragic end to a honeymoon. But James Cooper had one last surprise. Just as Sarah was checking his pulse one final time, the villa's silence was shattered by the sound of helicopter rotors. Bright lights flooded the bedroom windows. A voice on a megaphone ordered everyone inside to come out with their hands up. Sarah's first thought was that someone had discovered what she'd done. But when she opened the front door, she found herself facing not local police, but FBI agents in tactical gear. "Sarah Mitchell Cooper?" an agent asked. "We need you to come with us. You're in danger." In a secure room at the U.S. Embassy in Bridgetown, Barbados, Sarah learned the full truth about her husband, and it was far worse than she had imagined. James Cooper wasn't just a con man. He was Marcus Romano, one of the FBI's most wanted. Beyond financial fraud, he was suspected of involvement in 3 murders, all women who had gotten too close to learning his true identity. "We've been tracking him for years," Special Agent Diana Torres explained. "When he married you, we thought you might be an accomplice. But then we realized you were his next target." Agent Torres showed Sarah files on Romano's previous victims. Patricia Chen in Seattle, Rebecca Collins in Boston, and Maria Suarez in Miami. All professional women with access to financial systems, all married to different versions of Marcus Romano, all found dead from apparent suicides or accidents within weeks of their honeymoons. "He uses his wives to open new accounts, transfer funds, establish legitimacy," Torres explained. "Once he has what he needs, they become liabilities." Sarah felt the room spin. "He was going to kill me?" "We found this in his laptop bag." Torres slid a small vial across the table. "It's a particularly nasty poison, mimics the symptoms of a severe allergic reaction. According to his calendar, he planned to use it tomorrow night." Over the next several hours, Sarah learned how the FBI had tracked Romano to St. Lucia. They had been monitoring his activities for months, watching as he courted and married her. They had hoped he would lead them to his hidden accounts and criminal network. "We were going to move in tomorrow," Torres said, "but our surveillance showed he was accessing his accounts tonight. We couldn't risk waiting." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "That's where it gets complicated," Torres replied. "Because technically, you just tried to murder him." Marcus Romano was rushed to a hospital in Barbados. The sleeping pill overdose had put him in a coma, but doctors expected him to recover. Sarah should have been arrested. But the FBI had a different idea. "We need your help," Torres told her. "Romano has millions hidden away, money stolen from retirees, charities, people who trusted him. With your help, we might be able to recover it." "How?" "You're still his wife. When he wakes up, he won't know about the FBI raid. As far as he's concerned, he had a bad reaction to some medication. We want you to go back, play the devoted wife, and help us track that money." Sarah thought about running. She could return to New Orleans, try to forget this nightmare. But then she thought about Romano's victims, not just the women he had killed, but all the people he had stolen from. "I'll do it," she said. "But I want immunity, in writing." Torres nodded. "Already taken care of. Welcome to the FBI, Mrs. Cooper." When Marcus Romano opened his eyes in the Bridgetown hospital, Sarah was there holding his hand, playing the part of the worried wife perfectly. "James, honey," she whispered, using the name he knew. "You scared me so badly." What happened?" His voice was hoarse. "The doctor said you had a reaction to the champagne mixed with your anti-anxiety medication. Why didn't you tell me you were taking something?" The lie was perfect. It explained his symptoms while making him think his secret was still safe. Sarah watched as relief flooded his face. Every night after Romano fell asleep, Sarah met with FBI agents in a nearby hotel room. They equipped her with hidden recording devices and trained her on what information to look for. "Bank account numbers, passwords, contact names," Torres instructed. "We need anything that can help us trace the money." Sarah learned to ask casual questions about their future. Where would they live? Where would they invest? Each answer was another piece of the puzzle. A week after Romano woke up, Sarah nearly blew her cover. She was searching his laptop while he was in the shower when he suddenly returned to the room. "What are you doing?" His voice had an edge she'd never heard before. Sarah's heart raced, but her nursing training kicked in. Keep calm in a crisis. "Looking for that Christmas photo you showed me," she said smoothly. "The one from New York? I wanted to show it to the nurse. She's from Manhattan too." He relaxed, but Sarah noticed how his hand had moved toward his toiletry bag, where, she now knew, he kept a gun. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah helped the FBI map out Romano's entire criminal enterprise. She discovered he wasn't working alone. He had partners in various countries, other con men running similar schemes. She learned about his system. Marry women with access to financial institutions, use their credentials and connections to move money, eliminate them before they discovered the truth. It was brilliant in its simplicity and horrifying in its efficiency. Everything changed when Sarah found the photos. Hidden in an encrypted file on Romano's phone were pictures of his previous wives, not just the ones the FBI knew about, but others. many others. We've identified 12 victims so far, Torres told her during their nightly meeting. All dead, all made to look like accidents or suicides. Sarah felt sick. She had been sleeping next to a serial killer, pretending to love him while he planned her death. I can't do this anymore, she said. Just 2 more days, Torres promised. We're closing in on his main accounts. Once we have those, we can move. The next morning, Sarah received a text from an unknown number. He knows. She deleted it immediately, trying to stay calm. Was it from one of Romano's associates? Had her cover been blown? When Romano suggested they have dinner on their private terrace that night, Sarah knew. It was the same setup he'd used with his other wives. She texted the emergency signal to Torres. Headache getting worse. Then she prepared for the performance of her life. The terrace was beautiful, lit by candles and the Caribbean moon. Romano had ordered champagne, just like the night Sarah had tried to poison him. A toast, he said, holding up his glass, to new beginnings. Sarah noticed he didn't drink, just watched as she raised her glass to her lips. Sarah pretended to take a sip but didn't let the champagne touch her lips. She already knew it was poisoned, the same substance he'd used on his previous wives. You're not drinking, Romano said softly. His charming smile was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. Neither are you, Marcus? The change in his expression was instant. The mask of James Cooper disappeared completely. How long have you known? His voice was different now, harder with a hint of an accent she'd never heard before. Long enough. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward the knife beside her plate. How many were there before me? 12? More? Romano laughed, a chilling sound. You really want to know? 23. You would have been 24, also trusting, so easy to manipulate, just like you. Why? The money wasn't enough? The money? He smiled. That was just the beginning. The real pleasure was in watching them realize, right at the end, how completely they'd been fooled. Just like you're realizing now. He stood up slowly, reaching into his jacket. Sarah knew he was going for his gun. But Marcus Romano never got the chance to pull his weapon. The terrace erupted in chaos as FBI teams rappelled from helicopters and burst through the villa's doors. FBI, don't move! Romano looked around wildly, then grabbed Sarah, pulling her against him as a shield. She felt the cold press of a gun barrel against her temple. Back off, he shouted, or I'll kill her. What happened next took only seconds, but Sarah would remember it in slow motion for the rest of her life. She remembered her self-defense training from nursing school, how to deal with violent patients. As Romano's attention was split between her and the FBI agents, she made her move. A sharp elbow to his ribs, a stomp on his instep, and a twist to break his grip. The gun went off, the bullet striking the stone terrace as Sarah dove away. Multiple shots rang out. Romano fell, hit by FBI sniper fire. It was over. In the end, Marcus Romano survived his injuries, only to face multiple life sentences. The FBI recovered over $100 million in stolen funds, much of which was returned to his victims. The investigation revealed the full scope of his crimes: 23 murders across 12 countries, hundreds of millions in stolen money, and a network of criminal associates that took years to unravel. 6 months later, Sarah sat at Café du Monde, at the same table where she'd first met James Cooper. The French Quarter hadn't changed. Tourists still streamed past, jazz music still filled the air, and the beignets were still covered in powdered sugar. Lisa sat across from her, still trying to process everything that had happened. Do you ever regret not killing him that night? Lisa asked. When you had the chance? Sarah thought about it. No. Justice is better than revenge. His victims deserved to see him face his crimes. Sarah stayed in New Orleans, but moved to a different apartment and changed jobs. She worked with the FBI to help identify romance scams and financial fraud, speaking at conferences about her experience. She started a support group for victims of financial crimes and wrote a book about her experience, with proceeds going to help Romano's victims. A year after Romano's arrest, Sarah received a letter from a woman in Montreal. She'd seen Sarah's story on the news and recognized Romano as the man who had married her sister in 1998, his first known victim. Thank you, the letter read, for stopping him when we couldn't. Sarah kept that letter, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators hide behind the most charming smiles. Today, Sarah Mitchell still lives in New Orleans. She's cautious about dating, but hasn't given up on love. She keeps her nurse's license active, but works primarily as a fraud prevention consultant. Sometimes, late at night, she still thinks about those days in St. Lucia, about how close she came to becoming victim number 24. But mostly, she thinks about the lives saved by bringing Marcus Romano to justice. As for Romano himself, he sits in a federal supermax prison, serving multiple life sentences. His appeals have all been denied. His hidden millions have been found and returned. His network has been dismantled. And in Café du Monde, where this story began, tourists still share tables with strangers, unaware that one of the greatest murder mysteries of the decade started right there, over coffee and beignets in the heart of the French Quarter.